Behind the Shades.
My name is Jill Urbane, and I am a master's level social worker and an early childhood interventionist. I've been working with families for about 30 years, and the last 25 of those, I've been working as an early childhood interventionist with infants, toddlers, and preschoolers with developmental delays, providing services in the home to help parents better understand their children and help them meet their developmental milestones. So a lot of what I've been talking about with parents is language and communication, because that's big with young kids, but a lot of it is about behavior and parenting as well. And I started a YouTube channel where you can find me, and my handle there is @thementormomblog. And I've posted all sorts of information on development and parenting and all of the things that are so challenging for parents in those first couple of years.
So take us from the very beginning. How did you officially get started in this area? Because I know a lot of people want to have children. Children are a beautiful creation, and they're kind of like inspired to be it. But I'm always curious about the journey of the person who wants to help others with parents. So tell us how you got started in this and what was the genesis and the reason why?
Well, it's really quite an interesting story because working with children and parents was never on my radar at all. I actually didn't think I would ever become a mom myself, but I got into the field of social work thinking that I wanted to work in mental health. So I worked in a psychiatric facility for a while. And then from there, I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but I ended up working for the Department of Corrections in my state. And in that capacity as a prison counselor, I was working with young men. Most of them were between the ages of like 14 and 21 that were maximum security prisoners. And I think I was really just kind of struck in working with them on how so many of them had a history of neglect or abuse, and they were so bright. And it was just kind of heartbreaking to see these young men being incarcerated for the rest of their lives. And I thought, gosh, maybe there's something I can do to keep kids from ending up here. So from there, I ended up as a children's protective services worker for about 5 years. And that's where I really fell in love with being in families' homes, because when you're in somebody's home, that is real. You know, there's no covering anything up. That the pain is there, the feelings, the emotions. You really see their experience. And that's kind of where I fell in love with working with families. They were in crisis, and even though I was there as investigating abuse and neglect, these were families who had histories of trauma, who had faced their own challenges as parents growing up, and were doing the best they could with their kids, but they just didn't have a lot of tools in their toolbox. And so from there, I ended up, that's about the time that I had my first. I've got 2 kids. They're both adults now, and they still live at home, but that's a topic for a different day. Um, but that's about the time that I had my first child. And for me, it was not an easy journey. My first was very, very challenging for me. And I decided I didn't want to work in CPS anymore because it was so emotionally draining. And I felt like I really wasn't able to be there for my family because I was so worried about all of the other families and kids. So I had this opportunity come up to work for an early intervention program, which I had no experience with. And once I got in there, I was just hooked, 100% hooked, working with these families with young kids, because the journey they were going through was very similar to the journey I was going through with my own kids at the time.
I know a lot of boys, well, I shouldn't say they're boys, but I know a lot of men, when they describe how they're still at home, and you made that kind of joke, that's a topic for another day, right? They will say something along the lines is that I don't live with my mother, it's joint with my mother.
Well, and that is just kind of a whole different topic there, right? Like what young adults are facing in trying to get out and purchase homes and have enough income to do all the things that we kind of took for granted, when we were their age. The economy and all of that is just very, very different. It's a real challenge for young adults to go out and have the same kind of lifestyle that we had at that age.
It definitely is different, right? Because when we purchase a house, I don't know how long you've had your house, but I've had mine probably about 14 years now. And I remember what I paid for it back then. It's
Right.
almost like tripled. I remember a house going for 2.2 million in my neighborhood.
That's crazy.
And I remember, and I'm going to age myself, ladies and gentlemen. I remember a show called MTV Cribs. I remember $1 Million Home used to have like a pool, a basketball court, a theater, a club, a Starbucks. You didn't have to leave the front porch,
Right.
right?
It was its own city.
It was always, yeah, it was a city within your four walls. But these days, it's a lot more difficult for the children because they're still trying to figure it out in a world that I feel is changing a lot faster than maybe
Mhm.
when you and I, like I'm in my 30s, and I still remember vaguely the analog age where it's like my grandmother who raised me, she had a VCR,
Yeah.
right? There wasn't the internet. I remember going to, and I'm going to make sure I look young here. I remember going to the museum and seeing a rotary phone. Right?
I always
But
like to tell my
now,
kids that I was my parents' remote control. We were the ones turning the channels and adjusting the rabbit ears. That's how old I am.
exactly. You hit the side of it, make sure the picture came in right, all that good stuff, right?
Right, right.
But now we're trying to help kids figure it out by saying that, hey, some of the things that maybe we kind of chuckle about today wasn't necessarily the best when we were growing up. But to your point, the parents were doing the best that they could with the knowledge that they had because it
Mhm.
wasn't as resourceful as it is now. Do you find sometimes that there's that struggle with parents trying to say that, hey, the way that I was raised isn't necessarily the way that I should be raising my children?
Absolutely. And I really feel like, having done this for as many years as I have, I've seen the change in parenting and what parents nowadays are facing compared to what like I was facing when my kids were younger. And there are good things and then there are bad things. Like one of the things that I'm highly encouraged about with this progress in parenting that I'm seeing is that parents are really understanding the importance of addressing their child's social emotional growth, recognizing their feelings, acknowledging that. So I find that really, really encouraging. What I see so often with parents though is trying to figure out, like, if I grew up in a household where there was physical discipline, or my parents did a lot of yelling, or there was no talking back or expressing your feelings. What the parent said was the written rule, and that's the way it is, and you just have to kind of suck it up and accept it. And a parent who's like, I don't want to raise my child that way, I think they're struggling to find that middle ground where you can acknowledge your child's feelings and encourage their social emotional development and growth, but you can still also have firm limits, because that's a really, really important part. I always tell parents that the world is going to say no far more often than it's going to say yes to our kids. And it's really important for us at a really young age and consistently throughout the course of their lives to help them get used to that concept and prepare for that concept, because that's what creates resiliency. And that is the biggest indicator of success as adults.